I mean, I think you say, you know that it's, that you like it, you know, that's the first stage, and you like it. And you play it to people, you play it to friends, and you play it to colleagues and so on.
Picture this. Mick Jagger alone late at night, the roar of stadiums replaced by a silence that feels almost accusing. The walls don't echo anymore. They remember. For a moment, it sounds like he's about to name just one band, the one no one could ever reach. But that hesitation hides something heavier. It wasn't one, it was 5. 5 bands so far ahead that everyone else, even the Stones, were left chasing shadows. And the first name doesn't arrive gently. Led Zeppelin. There was nothing polite about Zeppelin's dominance. They didn't rise. They descended, like something summoned from somewhere darker than ambition. Dangerous, mythic, uncontrolled. When Zeppelin took the stage, the room didn't warm up. It submitted. Jagger watched crowds surrender completely, not dancing, not thinking, not even reacting in familiar ways. They stood still, transfixed, as if caught in the gravity of something larger than music. That disturbed him. Because this wasn't showmanship, this wasn't seduction, this was power without a smile. There was envy here, sharp and uncomfortable, not of success but of impact. Zeppelin didn't need image. They didn't need provocation. They were the provocation. Page barely moved. Plant barely tried to please. And yet, the authority was absolute. The sound alone was enough. And that kind of dominance is terrifying when your own weapon is movement, swagger, sweat, and spectacle. Mick knew how to command a stage, but Zeppelin erased the idea of command altogether. They didn't lead the crowd, they overwhelmed it. And in that moment, Jagger couldn't help but wonder something that still lingers unspoken. What happens to performance when presence alone is enough? From that crushing power, his thoughts slide towards something even more unsettling. The Who. Chaos made flesh. The Who didn't perform, they detonated. Broken instruments, broken rules, broken bodies. Every show felt like it might collapse under its own intensity, like something uncontrollable had been unleashed in front of the audience. What unsettled Mick wasn't just the noise, it was the lack of fear. The way Townshend smashed guitars as if they were disposable. The way Moon treated his own body like collateral damage. The way Daltrey roared, not to seduce the crowd, but to challenge it.
I mean, I can only listen to techno for like an hour, but that's my max here in a club. But I mean, I like all kinds of music, and I listen to lots of African music, old and new.
Jagger admired them, and that admiration curdled into something closer to dread. Because while the Stones flirted with danger, carefully balancing chaos with control, the Who lived inside it. They didn't step back from the edge. They ran toward it. They burned fast, loud, and without restraint, as if tomorrow didn't exist. There were nights when their destruction felt more honest than anyone else's discipline. Nights when Mick watched from the side of the stage and wondered if the audience could feel the difference, if they could sense that this wasn't an act, but a band daring itself to survive another show. And that honesty terrified him. Because chaos like that couldn't be copied, it couldn't be managed, and it couldn't last. Then comes a name that rewrote the rules without ever asking permission. The Velvet Underground. This was never about fame. It was about influence, and the kind that creeps under the skin instead of announcing itself. The Velvet Underground never ruled the charts, never filled stadiums, never played the game the way others did. They didn't chase approval, didn't soften their edges, didn't explain themselves. But Jagger knew the truth that terrified the industry. They changed everything quietly, without asking permission. They made darkness acceptable. They made discomfort fashionable. They made art dangerous again. What unsettled him most was how little they seemed to care. While others fought for relevance, the Velvet Underground operated like a secret, understood by few, ignored by many, but impossible to erase once discovered. Their influence spread sideways, not upward. It slipped into other bands, other scenes, other movements, reshaping them from the inside. They weren't competing with anyone. That was the threat. Because while bands like the Stones conquered stages and crowds, the Velvet Underground pulled the ground out from under everyone else. They questioned what music was allowed to be. They made success feel optional, and irrelevance feel deliberate. And that quiet rebellion lingered long after the noise faded. And then there was a band that turned atmosphere itself into power: Pink Floyd. Floyd didn't conquer audiences, they absorbed them. Their music didn't demand attention, it trapped it, slowly and mercilessly. Time stretched. Reality softened at the edges. Jagger knew the Stones could ignite a crowd, set bodies moving, hearts racing, but Floyd could dissolve an audience entirely, pull them inward, leave them suspended inside sound. That contrast haunted him. The Stones thrived on sweat, danger, physical presence. Floyd thrived on distance, atmosphere, control. Where Mick gave everything away on stage, Floyd withheld just enough to make people lean closer, searching for meaning. It wasn't louder, it was deeper. They were untouchable because they weren't chasing hits, rebellion, or reaction. They were building entire worlds, cold, vast, hypnotic worlds that didn't care whether you danced or screamed. And once you stepped inside those worlds, rock and roll's swagger felt fragile by comparison, almost small. And finally, there is the name that belongs at the end, because everything leads back to it: the Beatles. There was never a fair fight here, not even close, and Mick Jagger knows it better than anyone. The Beatles didn't just dominate charts, they bent reality around themselves. While others fought for attention, they rewrote the rules of what a band could be, how fast success could come, how completely the world could fall in line. Every move they made didn't just reset the starting line, it erased it. For Jagger, the rivalry was constant and suffocating. Every Stones release lived in their shadow before it was even heard. Every headline compared, measured, ranked, as if greatness were a scoreboard that always began with the Beatles already ahead. They weren't just competition, they were a ceiling. Brilliant, unreachable, and painfully perfect in the eyes of a world that seemed desperate to believe in them. What hurt most wasn't their success. It was the inevitability of it. The sense that no matter how hard the Stones pushed, no matter how wild the shows, how dangerous the image, how relentless the touring, the Beatles were always treated as the natural order of things, as if rock history had already been written, and everyone else was simply filling in the margins. And that pressure never truly faded. It followed Jagger across decades, into sold-out stadiums and legendary status of his own. Even then, the comparison lingered, quiet, invisible, impossible to shake. When the names finally stop, the silence returns. Jagger leans back, the weight of comparison settling deep in his chest. These bands weren't just better in moments, they were operating on levels most artists never reach. They weren't playing the same game. And that leaves a final, uncomfortable question hanging in the air, heavy and unresolved. If greatness exists on this scale, was everyone else, including legends, always meant to follow? Because some bands don't compete. They define the distance. The room grows quiet again, heavier than before. The kind of silence that presses against the chest. Mick doesn't look angry. He doesn't look defeated either. What settles on his face is something harder to name: acceptance mixed with defiance, pride tangled with a trace of exhaustion. Because admitting this truth doesn't erase the Stones, it explains them. They were never meant to be the most powerful, the most experimental, or the most untouchable. They were never built to disappear into myths or hide behind concepts. They were meant to endure, to adapt, to survive in the shadow of giants and still find a way to matter night after night, city after city, decade after decade. Mick knows now that chasing bands like these wasn't a weakness. It was the engine, the pressure, the obsession, the reason the Stones kept sharpening themselves instead of slowing down. Without those impossible standards looming ahead, without giants always just out of reach, maybe they would have burned out early. Maybe comfort would have killed them faster than failure ever could. He lets the silence sit, long enough to hear his own breathing, long enough to feel the weight of time. Some bands are out of everybody's league, others learn how to keep playing anyway. And maybe that's the real question Mick leaves behind, unresolved and unsettling. Is greatness about standing alone at the top, or about surviving long enough to keep chasing what you can never quite catch? And maybe that endless chase, that refusal to stop moving, that fight against being left behind, is its own kind of greatness?